my name appeared in several books that had come out condemning the Warren Commission. So people began to come from all over the country. And they'd come in and ask me if they could talk to me and ask me what happened on that day. And I saw nothing wrong with telling them what I saw and heard. You know, I gave my statement. So the sheriff called me in and asked me what the people wanted that were coming down there. And I told him they just wanted to talk to me about what happened. And he said, well, you tell them when they come that you didn't see anything and you didn't hear anything.
Did the interviews keep on after you were fired, or were you continued to be?
No, I tried to get back to a normal way of life. You know, I had a family to support, and I took a job managing a bail bond company. But people weren't coming around so much asking me questions as they were following me. And people I had known for a long time, one in particular, asked me to meet him at a coffee shop at Columbia and Carroll Street. And so he was about an hour late, and I was sitting in my car waiting outside of his place. And these two cars kept circling the block. So we took, finally he arrived and we went over and we had our coffee. We were followed in by this man in a checkered jacket that was driving one of the cars. So by the time we finished our coffee, we started to leave. The man jumped up and he left first. And we walked out and went over to Columbia Street. We were standing on the curb, and all of a sudden my friend fell to the ground. And I thought, well, he stumbled, you know. And for some reason, I stepped off of the curb, and when I did, a shot came from behind and passed over my left ear, and I headed for my car immediately and went home. And,
your friend dropped, in other words, to be out of the line of fire.
Before the shot was fired.
He apparently knew what was going to happen.
That's my conclusion now. I was digging up some information, actually, for Jim Garrison and Penn Jones, Jr. of Midlothian. I was digging up some information that they wanted, you know, in Dallas. Mm-hmm. And I parked my car on the side of the street, and I went to get this information. And when I came back and cranked up my car, it blew up. The engine caught fire, the hood came up, the firewall blew out. I had all the fuses blew, and I was burnt in the chest area, and I had pieces of glass and metal in the chest, small pieces. I don't know what they put in it, but...
it's not possible the car itself could have malfunctioned, did it?
Not that much of an explosion, no.
Somebody put a bomb in your car.
Somebody put something in it. This last time we had a case to work in West Texas in the Davis Mountains. And our boss sent me out there. And he called the client, who was on a three-party line, and told him what flight I was coming into Midland on, where I was going to rent my car, where I would meet him, and at what time. So I flew into Midland, and I rented the car, and I arrived. I was about 2 miles from where I was supposed to meet the client, a mile or 2 miles from where I was supposed to meet him. I was supposed to meet him at 3 o'clock, and it was 2:55 then. And I rounded a curve, and there were two men standing outside of a car that was parked crossways in the road. And there wasn't anything to do but try to go around them, and I tried and I missed, and I went over the edge of the mountain, and I rolled end over end for 90 feet or so. I broke my back in 2 places. I broke my left shoulder. I tore the ulnar nerve and ligaments out of my left elbow, crushed my left foot, my right leg. I spent a year in a hospital, 4 major surgeries, 2 on my back, and I'm now totally disabled in the back, partially disabled in the right leg, and unemployed again.
Do you think anyone else is going to come forward and tell it like it was, or as they saw it?
I don't know. I can't speak for anyone else.
Do you think it'll help your situation if someone else does? Or do you think they too would be harassed and put down?
If they knew something really important, one of us would have to go. You can't have corroborating witnesses. It's
there are people who know something very important.
I'm sure they are. Now, Buddy Walters was one of them and knew something very important, but he was shot to death here a couple of years ago. Now, I have two friends that were on the bond desk. One of them was still talking to me, and he died of cancer. And then the other one, he died here, I believe, last December of a kidney infection. And then there was another one that was still talking to me. And these were all people with the sheriff's office now. And he died, and I'm not really sure what he died of. I called the sheriff and offered my condolences, you know, and all the sheriff had to say was he had more chain than he could carry, the man that died.
Roger Craig died in Dallas, May 15, 1975, of a rifle wound in the chest. He owned 2 pistols. The coroner's verdict? Suicide.
Bring peace to them.
A peaceful revolution for human rights.
For too long, my country, the wealthiest nation in a continent which is not wealthy, failed to carry out its full responsibilities to its sister republics. We have now accepted that responsibility. In the same way, those who possess wealth and power in poor nations must accept their own responsibilities. They must lead the fight for those basic reforms which alone can preserve the fabric of their societies. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable.
Here at home, the future is equally revolutionary. The New Deal and the Fair Deal were bold measures for their generation. But now this is a new generation.
This administration has failed to recognize that in these changing times, with a revolution of rising expectations sweeping the globe, the United States has lost its image as a new, strong, vital, revolutionary society.
The long view shows us that the revolution of national independence is a fundamental fact of our era. This revolution will not be stopped.
I believe in an America that is officially neither Catholic, Protestant, nor Jewish, where no public official either requests or accepts instructions on public policy from the Pope, the National Council of Churches, or any other ecclesiastical source, where no religious body seeks to impose its will, directly or indirectly, upon the general populace or the public acts of its officials, where no church or church school is granted any public funds or political preference.
We need a permanent unemployment insurance program so that there are those who want to work and can't find a job will not be shifted and living on a marginal income without hope for themselves. These are things which other countries in Western Europe did 30 or 40 years ago. Great Britain, and we regard ourselves as a progressive society, had these provisions at the time of the First World War. And yet this is suggested as a most radical proposal. We have to, in the next 8 years, build as many school buildings as we built in our entire history. And yet, we have found it extremely difficult to secure support for this vital program. We cannot leave the 17 million people who have retired and who may become ill. If they have no money, under the legislation now in the books, they have a chance to receive some as indigents. But that is not the way we believe it should be done. And if their son happens to have some money in the bank, they do not qualify. And he goes and pays out, and it may break him at a time when he has responsibilities to his children. Why it is so difficult to secure passage of a minimum wage, paying somebody in interstate commerce $1 or $1.10 or 15 cents, I do not understand. But it is regarded in some circles as highly radical and highly inflationary. For the first time, unemployed men can retire at 62. For the first time. And I do not regard this as a particularly radical proposal. Dependent children can receive aid for the first time in our history without the wage earner deserting his family. In the old days, before this act was passed, if a child was undernourished, it was necessary for the wage earner to desert his wife and family in order that those children should qualify for assistance. But last year that was changed.
The president's willingness to abandon tradition was responsible, in part, for his failure to succeed with the business community, in spite of efforts at conciliation.
I don't remember the figures exactly, but the president was not extremely popular in Texas, nor was he in the country.
I am delighted to have a chance to say a few words about this administration's policy, which has been the subject of a good deal of discussion, acrimony, and controversy on wages and prices and profits. Now, I know there are some people who say that this isn't any business of the President of the United States, and who believe that the President of the United States should be the honorary chairman of a great fraternal organization and confine himself to ceremonial functions. But that isn't what the Constitution says. And I did not run for President of the United States to fulfill that office in that way. Harry Truman once said there are 14 or 15 million Americans who have the resources to have representatives in Washington to protect their interests. And that the interests of the great mass of the other people, 150 or 60 million, is the responsibility of the President of the United States, and I propose to fulfill it. Then I believe it is the business of the President of the United States to concern himself with the general welfare and the public interest, and if the people feel that it is not, then they should secure the services of a new President of the United States.
He was not all that popular in the country, and his popularity had diminished considerably, as a matter of fact.
Businessmen are welcome at the White House. And I welcome the chance to address business meetings such as this. Not because I expect that it will necessarily affect the results of elections, but I do think it can affect what this country does.
He was characterized as being anti-business, and part of that was, I think, was the result of his actions with respect to steel prices.
The simultaneous and identical actions of United States Steel and other leading steel corporations increasing steel prices by some $6 a ton constitute a wholly unjustifiable and irresponsible defiance of the public interest. In this serious hour in our nation's history, when we are confronted with grave crises in Berlin and Southeast Asia, when we are devoting our energies to economic recovery and stability, when we are asking reservists to leave their homes and families for months on end, and servicemen to risk their lives, and 4 were killed in the last 2 days in Vietnam, and asking union members to hold down their wage requests, at a time when restraint and sacrifice are being asked of every citizen, the American people will find it hard, as I do, to accept a situation in which a tiny handful of steel executives, whose pursuit of private power and profit exceeds their sense of public responsibility, can show such utter contempt for the interests of 185 million Americans. A few gigantic corporations have decided to increase prices in ruthless disregard of their public responsibilities. Some time ago, I asked each American to consider what he would do for his country, and I asked the steel companies. In the last 24 hours, we had their answer.
I realize that there are some businessmen who feel only they want to be left alone, that government and politics are none of their affairs, that the balance sheet and profit rate of their own corporation are of more importance than the worldwide balance of power or the nationwide rate of unemployment. But I hope it's not rushing the season to recall to you the passage from Dickens' Christmas Carol, in which Ebenezer Scrooge is terrified by the ghost of his former partner, Jacob Marley. And Scrooge, appalled by Marley's story of ceaseless wandering, cries out, "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob." And the ghost of Marley, his legs bound by a chain of ledger books and cash boxes, replied, "Business? Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Members and guests of the Florida State Chamber of Commerce, whether we work in the White House or the State House or in a house of industry or commerce, mankind is our business. And if we work in harmony, if we understand the problems of each other and the responsibilities that each of us bears, then surely the business of mankind will prosper. And your children and mine will move ahead in a secure world, and one in which there's opportunity for them all." Thank you.
No one was more hostile than the Southerners of the far right. Not only were the Kennedys showing themselves soft on communism and in favor of civil rights for black citizens throughout the South, but Kennedy had hurt their pockets by scaling back oil depletion tax credits.
But Texas was home to Kennedy's most dangerous opponents.
Oil millionaires and billionaires in Texas were petrified of one major factor that John F. Kennedy was considering, cutting the oil depletion allowance. And there was no way they were going to allow that. Essentially, they would save billions of dollars if it stays as it is. It was called a 27.5% oil depletion allowance. John Kennedy thought it was too liberal.
If a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich.
Big business is using the stock market slump as a means of forcing you to come to terms with business. Their attitude is, now we have you where they want you. Have you seen any reflection of this attitude?
I can't believe I'm where big business wants me.
We are anxious to live in harmony with the Russian people.
Communism in reality is not a political party. It is a way of life, an evil and malignant way of life. It reveals a condition akin to disease that spreads like an epidemic. And like an epidemic, a quarantine is necessary to keep it from infecting this nation.
A warning to the American people not to fall into the same trap as the Soviets, not to see only a distorted and desperate view of the other side, not to see conflict as inevitable, accommodation as impossible, and communication as nothing more than an exchange of threats. No government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue. The hard reality of life in much of Latin America will not be solved simply by complaining about Castro, by blaming all problems on communism, or generals, or nationalism.
The Republican National Chairman has said that your administration's attitude in general is one of appeasement toward communism throughout the world. Do you have any comment on this criticism by top spokesman of the opposition party?
No, I don't.
Still hail the Russian people for their many achievements in science and space, in economic and industrial growth, in culture, in acts of courage. Among the many traits the peoples of our two countries have in common, none is stronger than our mutual abhorrence of war. Almost unique among the major world powers, we have never been at war with each other. And no nation in the history of battle ever suffered more than the Soviet Union.